Minnesota Vikings who are worth trading this 2021 offseason. Now, the Vikings have a lot of aging players this offseason who really all can be argued to be traded. Outside of maybe Kirk Cousins and Adam Thielen, the rest of them, you can argue that the Minnesota Vikings could trade them. Now, Kirk Cousins, you can also argue that the Vikings could trade Kirk, but first of all, we have to find his replacement to trade Kirk. And honestly, as long as Rick Spielman is our GM, I don't think talking about trading Kirk is even a question at this point. And then Adam Thielen and Harrison Smith, the Vikings cannot trade those guys either, because both Adam Thielen and Harrison Smith just added so much value to the team last year, and the Minnesota Vikings cannot trade those two guys, and those are two other players in their 30s. But other than that, these are four Vikings that I think are very high. There's a possibility that they can be traded, and it would help the team if they trade any one of these guys. Starting off with Riley Reiff, 32 years old. He's going to be a 32-year-old this offseason, or this next season when the Minnesota Vikings season starts. 71.4 PFF grade in 2020, which is very good for offensive tackle. 1 sack, 1 penalty. Only 1 sack and 1 penalty allowed in 15 games. So Riley Reiff had an incredible season with the Minnesota Vikings, and honestly, his best season of his entire career, coming off of a first-round draft pick by the Detroit Lions, after that signed with the Minnesota Vikings. I think this was his 5th season with the Vikings, and by far his best season. I mean, going into the season, I thought the Minnesota Vikings were going to cut him. And honestly, the fact that the Minnesota Vikings didn't cut him came by a surprise. It didn't only come by a surprise, but it was almost a disappointment too. Because the reason why the Vikings did not cut Riley Reiff, now he was a very overpaid player coming into this 2020 season after how bad he was the 2 seasons prior. Not as good for what he was expected to be. Anyways, they signed Ezra Cleveland, so we already have his replacement already in Ezra Cleveland. Now, they signed Ezra Cleveland, and they did not start him. Now, he was a 2nd-round draft pick, and typically, offensive linemen drafted in the 2nd round are starters out of college. And I would expect Ezra Cleveland to have been a starter out of college. Now, he was a starter, I guess you could say, as a right guard, but once again, he didn't start the season as a right guard, and they didn't draft him to be a right guard. The Minnesota Vikings did not draft Ezra Cleveland to be a right guard. The only reason why he was right guard was because all of our other guys sucked, and the guys who were bad were injured anyways. I mean, Pat Elflein, they didn't even get rid of Pat Elflein until he was injured. Drew Samia, they didn't even bench him until he was injured when they had to. And then they brought in Ezra Cleveland. So this is basically how Mike Zimmer operates. He does not bench players because of bad performance. He benches players once they get injured, and then they're gone. That's basically how Mike Zimmer has operated, and it makes no sense, but whatever, it's worked this last season. Ezra Cleveland, as a right guard, he did not look great, and I'm assuming as a left tackle, he's still not ready to play. Now, I'm not there doing practice, and I've talked about this already, but they didn't start Ezra Cleveland at left tackle week 17 when Riley Reiff was out with COVID. They started Rashad Hill. Now, Rashad Hill is a great backup, and I didn't hate the decision because I'm a huge Rashad Hill guy. I love the guy, and they should give him another contract. And this is what the Minnesota Vikings have on their offensive line. There is a lot of depth. They're just as not clear starters. Outside of maybe, I guess you can say Riley Reiff, and then Brian O'Neill and Garrett Bradbury. I guess you could say these guys are clear starters, but at the guard position, there's depth. There's just not clear starters. So Riley Reiff is very possibly could be traded for the Minnesota Vikings, and wherever he goes, I wish him luck. He is going to be an aging player now, and we already have his replacement once again. Number 2, Kyle Rudolph. Now, Kyle Rudolph is another guy that I've been talking about a lot on this podcast because both Riley Reiff and Kyle Rudolph, and the reason why I have them at 1 and 2 is because we have their replacements already. Now, Ezra Cleveland, once again, he may not be ready to play, but we know we look good without Kyle Rudolph. When Kyle Rudolph went out with the injury and we had Tyler Conklin and Irv Smith Jr. as our tight end duo, they looked better than Kyle Rudolph this last 2020 season. And we are ready to trade on Kyle Rudolph. He's 31 years old, so he's an aging player. He's been with the Vikings for what? I think that was his 10th season with the Minnesota Vikings. And Kyle Rudolph throughout his entire career has been great. It's just, at this point, Minnesota Vikings, we are better off not paying Kyle Rudolph. He is a very overpaid contract, and he's signed through 2023, which is going to be a huge cap casualty for the Minnesota Vikings. And once again, we just don't need Kyle Rudolph. I mean, Tyler Conklin is now a free agent. We want to bring him back as a tight end too. We want Irv Smith Jr. Now, Irv Smith Jr. has suffered with drop passes in the past, but once again, what I've seen from Irv Smith Jr., he has high potential. He was a 2nd-round draft pick in 2019 and is ready to be our tight end 1 from what I've seen. Now, once again, he has suffered with drop passes, so I wouldn't give him as many targets as you typically would a tight end that was drafted in the 2nd round. But once again, I think Irv Smith Jr. is ready to be our starting tight end, especially when he's comboed with Tyler Conklin. They look amazing together, and we are ready to move on from Kyle Rudolph. He is an aging player, and the Minnesota Vikings should not bring him back, especially because he's expected to make $8 million in 2021, when, in all honesty, He may be our best tight end on the roster, but is not looking like it. I mean, this last season, Tyler Conklin, when he was out there, looked better. Irv Smith Jr., I guess you could say he did look better, but once again, he did suffer with a lot of drop passes, and we can't just dismiss that. Irv Smith Jr. has got to work on that. For number 3, this is another guy that I've been talking about a lot in this channel, and that is Anthony Barr. Once again, we have his replacement in Eric Wilson. And this is a huge question that the Minnesota Vikings have to answer this offseason. Do we want to stick with Anthony Barr, or do we want to stick with Eric Wilson? Because we can't stick with both. If you bring back Eric Wilson, he will be a backup to Anthony Barr, because it simply works on who are you paying more is going to be your starter. And Anthony Barr is expected to make what? $12.9 million in 2021. If there's one thing we know about the Minnesota Vikings, we cannot pay a linebacker $12.9 million in 2021 when we have a guy like Eric Wilson who is ready to play. Now, Anthony Barr, he missed the entire season. I guess, okay, he started one game in the NFL this year, and that was week 1 against the Packers. Did not look a whole lot. Did not look as great as he used to. I mean, Anthony Barr is a player that's very interesting. He's 29 years old now. I mean, that's still pretty young for a linebacker. They typically can play well into their 30s at the linebacker position, and he's 29 years old now, and he will be 29 years old, I should say, going into this 2021 season. And are the Minnesota Vikings ready to keep on to Anthony Barr? It's going to be hard to let go of Anthony Barr because Mike Zimmer loves Anthony Barr. That was his draft pick when he came in as head coach for the Minnesota Vikings. He took Anthony Barr, and Anthony Barr is his guy, and he loves playing with the Vikings. So that's going to be really hard for the Vikings to let go of him, but I'm all on board with that. Because the Minnesota Vikings, if there's one thing I know, we cannot pay this guy. Because how bad the Vikings are suffering right now at cap space, and there's bigger needs than this Anthony Barr outside linebacker right now. Now, Anthony Barr is another guy who a lot of people give him hate, but really he's not being used properly. If there's one thing we remember about Anthony Barr's all-pro seasons, it's when they used him, they blitzed him. It's when they used him what do they call it? Hands in the dirt or something like that. It's when they used him as a pass rushing linebacker. Now he's trying to be used as a run stopping linebacker. They try to use him in coverage too. That's not who he is. That's not who Anthony Barr is. So really, he's not being utilized properly. And if he was, you would see how good Anthony Barr really can be. And he's a player I think the Minnesota Vikings have got to trade. And if we cannot trade Anthony Barr, I'm sorry, but we have to cut him. Because Eric Wilson is a guy you want to hold on to. And this linebacker group is great. Now, one thing we know, this linebacker group last 5 weeks of the season was bad ever since Eric Kendricks got injured. I mean, we remember that Bears game. Vikings should have won that Bears game if David Montgomery did not rush for over 100 yards. And that's simply because we did not have Eric Kendricks. And then once again, look at the Saints game. Alvin Kamara rushed for 6 touchdowns to us. Actually, there was 7 rushing touchdowns against us because Taysom Hill also had a rushing touchdown on the goal line. So there was 7 rushing touchdowns against the Minnesota Vikings against the New Orleans Saints. And we knew if Eric Kendricks was out there, this would not be the case. And then Eric Wilson, Eric Kendricks, and Troy Dye, this rookie coming out of Oregon that the Minnesota Vikings drafted in, I believe, the 4th round, might have been 5th round. Minnesota Vikings, which is a great spot to draft linebackers, by the way. And the Minnesota Vikings drafted him somewhere around there. And this linebacker group looks great. There's 3 groups of linebackers. This looks really good when Eric Kendricks is healthy, when Troy Dye is healthy, and Eric Wilson is out there. So in all honesty, we don't need Anthony Barr. As great as Anthony Barr may be, and as great as we have seen him play, we do not need Anthony Barr, and he's a player that I believe the Minnesota Vikings should trade if they can. And if they can't, they should just cut him. And for number 4, this is a player who I have not been talking about a whole lot on this channel, and that is Shamar Stephen. And the reason why I haven't been talking about Shamar Stephen a whole lot is because he's the only guy on this list who we don't have as replacement. The Minnesota Vikings ranked dead last by PFF in pass rush grade. And then our coverage grade wasn't very good, and we were bad at stopping the run. A lot of that has to do with injuries. I know I'm not going to just dismiss the fact that the Vikings suffered a lot of injuries. But once again, with Michael Pierce coming back, assuming he does come back and doesn't opt out another season, we can move on from Shamar Stephen. Because Shamar Stephen, he's going into his 30s, and he's already hit his ceiling with the Minnesota Vikings. And we don't need Shamar Stephen. Now, his contract is very well. I mean, he's signed through 2021, expected to make $3.7 million, and he's our starting defensive tackle, so this is not overpaid for a starting defensive tackle at all. But once again, he is very replaceable. Minnesota Vikings should draft his replacement. I want to see a rookie on the Vikings starting defensive line in 2021, filling in for either Shamar Stephen, filling in for possibly, hopefully, Ifeadi Odenigbo. I'm sorry. I know a lot of people love Ifeadi Odenigbo, and I love him too. He's just not a starting defensive end. He is way too slow to be a starting defensive end. He's a guy you want to have on your roster though. He's a very good backup, and we've seen how good he is as a backup defensive end. And honestly, Vikings should use him on third down, on third and long, because he brings that interior pass rush that the Minnesota Vikings have not had in a long time. Use Afadi on the inside. Stop using him as a defensive end is what I'm trying to say here. Because when it's third and long and you throw Afadi on the inside, you can get to the passer with ease. He's a great pass rusher, terrible run stopper, and too slow for a defensive end. So Afadi's a player that you want to have on your roster, but not on your starting defensive lineup. Afadi's a very good player, and I hope to see either a rookie replacing him, maybe even DJ Wanham or Everson Griffin replacing him. One of those guys, possibly. That's another possibility. But really, a guy replacing Shamar Stephen. If the Vikings can take a 3-tech in the first round, second round, of course we don't have a second round draft pick, but Minnesota Vikings can either trade down or trade up. If we can, that would be huge for this Vikings defense. This is a huge need for the Vikings defense. And if we can trade away Shamar Stephen, now once again, Shamar Stephen's not a big guy that you need to trade away. He's not going to save you in cap, but really you could trade up for the guy. I mean, Minnesota Vikings maybe in the third round can trade up 10 picks and throw Shamar Stephen and give him to another team. This is like the only way I can see Shamar Stephen being traded away is just moving up in the draft. Maybe a draft day 1, day 2 trade, something like that. Shamar Stephen's not a big time trade. He is a starter, but once again, he's an aging player, and I don't think any team is going to be giving up really anything for Shamar Stephen. But once again, he's another guy that I really think is worth trading if you can trade up and get his replacement possibly in the third round, in the fourth round of the NFL draft. So these are 4 guys that I do think are really worth trading for the Vikings. Of course, Riley Reiff, huge guy we have to talk about. Again, Kyle Rudolph, Anthony Barr. We have these guys' replacement, and then also Shamar Stephen. He's another guy that we can talk about because he is an aging player, and I think Minnesota Vikings might be better off without him if we can trade up and get his replacement, maybe trade up in the third round. We'll see what happens. We will see what happens, but this is a high possibility. Any of these 4 guys can get traded, and if any of these guys get traded, this would be huge for the Vikings, and I hope to see it happen, especially Riley Reiff if Ezra Cleveland looks good. And then Anthony Barr would be huge too. Actually, Anthony Barr would be the biggest one that the Vikings can trade him away. And Kyle Rudolph. And Shamar Stephen. I would love any of these guys to get traded away because of how bad the Vikings are against the cap this year. And this would be huge for the team. Let me know what y'all think.